You're listening to the Journey Podcast. What if your relationship with food reflects your relationship with yourself? Join us today to explore this intriguing concept. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer, and with decades of experience with sadness, pain, anxiety, and stress, I finally figured out how to leave all that behind. And this podcast shows you how to break free permanently so you can reclaim your sanity and find the self-esteem and energy to go after the life you desire. With real talk about mental health, holistic healing, and the tough journey of coming out the other end. This is the Journey Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. Food is more than just fuel for our bodies. It's often intertwined with our emotions in complex ways. In this episode, we dive into the nuanced world of emotional eating, exploring it from a compassionate and holistic perspective. Our discussion goes beyond conventional diet advice, examining the deeper connections between our feelings and eating habits. We'll uncover mindful strategies for developing a healthier relationship with food, exploring how movement, mindfulness, and nutrition can work together to support overall well-being. Tune in to discover a kinder, more balanced approach to food and self-care that nourishes both body and mind. After years of struggling with emotional eating in her late teens and early 20s, Madeleine Karlsson set out on a journey to understand why she was emotionally eating and how she could break free from it. Today, Maddy shares her tools in her online program, Fit Body, Fresh Mind, a Pilates, yoga, mindfulness, and nutrition platform for people who want to get lean and strong the kind and mindful way. Maddy is Swedish and Czech, but grew up in Belgium and lived in London, Sydney, and Monaco before calling Costa Rica home. In her free time, Maddy loves to surf, spend time with her dogs, and ride her horse, Bill. Let's meet Madeleine Karlsson. Hi, Maddy. It's so great to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you because emotional eating is such an important topic to talk about. And I think something that a lot of us experience, but we don't know a lot about it. So thank you for coming on today and chatting with us, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Petra. It's an absolute honor to be here. I absolutely love your podcast, so I feel truly honored to be a guest here, and I'm excited for our chat today.
Oh, thank you so much. It is absolutely my pleasure to have you here today, and all the way from Costa Rica. So I feel very international today. What a privilege. So for starters, would you like to share maybe a little bit about yourself and tell our listeners a bit of your story and how it brought you to what you do today, and let them know what you do so they can get to know you a little bit?
Amazing. So, my name is Madeleine Karlsson. People often call me Maddy. I am a nutrition and holistic health coach and a Pilates teacher and a yoga teacher. I've always been really interested in health, nutrition, and fitness. But a few years ago, when I was in my late teens and early 20s, I went down a road that was pretty destructive in my kind of obsession around fitness and food. I struggled with emotional eating. I was a little bit of a binge eater. I was a binge exerciser as well. And I really, really struggled with finding the right balance. And I think from the outside, people used to look at me and think, oh, she's so disciplined. She's so healthy. She does all these things right. But what people didn't see was the hatred I had for myself in my mind, and that internal dialogue. So physically, from the outside, people thought, oh, she runs. I was training for a marathon at the time. I was running half marathons. I was going to the gym every day. Like, I was very, very committed to my fitness. But within me, like inside of me, my mental health was really not good. And so that had consequences on my relationship with food. So I would either deprive myself or binge, emotionally eat, then feel guilty. And that's when the restriction would start. So I had a really hard time understanding how to find balance with food. And I was really determined to be fit, strong, and healthy. And like, that was so important to me. But somehow I just couldn't understand how I could make that a reality. And I was living in this state of using exercise as punishment and of, not allowing myself to eat because I'd overeaten the day before, and using food as a way to make up for how I was feeling. And it was a very difficult time of my life. And it was very hard for me to find the right help at the time. And that's kind of, I think, how a lot of these journeys start, right? When I've listened to a lot of your pet podcast episodes, this is like the typical thing. You're in a really difficult situation. You can't find the answers. You eventually do find the answers. And when you do, you're so excited and eager to share them with the world that you start doing work around that and sharing that message. And I think my biggest kind of passion and joy in my work now is helping people see how wonderful and amazing you feel when you take an approach to food and fitness that comes from a place of love. I think there's a dialogue around food and fitness that's always from a place of, oh, you don't earn this, or you need to earn this, or you don't deserve that, and so on. And for me, it was really important to remove all that vocabulary from my mind in order to heal and to start looking after myself from a place of love. And I mean, I'm 40 now, but I feel better in my body. I feel stronger. I feel leaner. Like the physical has definitely followed the mental. But I think that oftentimes we think if we're not hard on ourselves, if we don't hate ourselves enough, if we don't punish ourselves, then we're not going to get the physical results. But what I've noticed with myself and in my work with clients is like, no, you need to get the mental piece. Like you need to find the mental balance, and then the physical follows. And when it does, it's irreversible. It just becomes the external expression becomes a reflection of the internal, and that's kind of where you feel your best. So yeah, that's a very kind of short description or long description of what I do and how I end up here.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us and giving us a bit of insight in what happened. I do feel that those are often the best pieces that we connect with, are the ones where we have those experiences and then we're able to pass some of that knowledge to others to maybe help shorten their journey in all the trial and error that's involved when we run into challenges and we don't quite know what to do. So thank you for giving us those insights. And you mentioned something really curious to me as a person who has struggled with emotional eating before. It is something that we often think of as just weight gain. So when a lot of people talk about emotional eating, it's sitting on the couch and just having lots of chips or popcorn or unhealthy things and gaining a lot of weight. But you also mentioned that there's a restrictive side to that. And to me, I wasn't aware that that was part of emotional eating as well. So can you maybe explain to our listeners a little bit those two sides? You said it came also from a cycle maybe of punishment or keeping things from yourself. But there really are the two sides involved. We're not just talking about overeating when we talk about emotional eating.
I mean, so it comes in so many different forms, right? For me, emotional eating is the intention behind why you eat. And so that can be expressed in so many different behaviors. In my case, I was using exercise and restriction as a way to try and make up for my emotional eating. Some people don't have that. Some people emotionally eat, but they don't necessarily go into restriction after, or they don't go and use exercise as a form of punishment. Everyone has kind of a different pattern. And I guess that's what makes my work so interesting, because what I've realized is that there's no one size fits all for emotional eating. It's more understanding like what motivates this person to eat more than what they need. What motivates this person to reach for the food that they don't necessarily know they need, or that they know they're not hungry, but they're still reaching for the food. Like, what is the motivation behind that? And once I can understand that, then I know that I can help them, and or they can help themselves, because at the end of the day, I'm just the one asking the questions, and then people realize things about themselves, and then they set themselves free. And I think that this is a very good question, that it can come up in a lot of different kind of shapes and behaviors, but it's the intention behind it. Why am I doing this? And that's why when people want to lose weight, they know that they have to tackle emotional eating, but the way they do it is with willpower and discipline. So they say, okay, I'm going to go on a diet and I'm going to be super restrictive and I'm not going to allow myself, but they don't actually address the underlying behavior to why they were overeating before. And so they stop the diet, and what happens is that they go straight back into that same behavior and they put the weight back on, because we can't stay on a diet forever, and we can't use discipline and willpower forever to hide from our triggers. And so that's why breaking free from emotional eating definitely will help you lose weight if that's the journey that you're on. But it goes so much deeper than a diet, because it goes in and looks at your behaviors and it's like, what is it that's making you do this?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Also explains why people have sort of these peaks and valleys when they are struggling with emotional eating. And what have you found in your journey with yourself, with your clients? What are some of those triggers? What are some of those underlying reasons why people choose to emotionally eat? What causes that?
So I generally work on many different levels, many different layers, in order to understand why people turn to food, even though, they're not hungry, or why they overeat. And actually the most fundamental one, and the one I generally start working on first, is understanding whether what they eat is actually nourishing them. Because we live in a world now where food has become such a confusing subject, and everyone thinks that they're eating healthy. But then when we look at what they're actually putting inside their bodies, a lot of the times they're not getting enough nutrients. And so I look at the nutrient density of their food and I help them improve the nutrient density. Because if you have a lingering feeling of hunger throughout the day, you will reach for food. You're not kind of hungry because you've just had a meal, but there's this lingering feeling inside of you where you're like, I feel like I should have food. And so you might label yourself as an emotional eater because you're like, I know I shouldn't be having this. But if we can improve the nutrient density of what you eat, then maybe that lingering feeling, a lot of the times, that lingering feeling doesn't even show up anymore. And so that solves a lot of problems. Also, by improving the person's diet, I help them stabilize blood sugar levels. And a lot of the times, why do we turn to food at 4 o'clock in the afternoon? Because our blood sugar levels drop. And we call ourselves an emotional eater, and we say, like, why do I have to have that chocolate at 4 o'clock? I should stop doing that. I'm an emotional eater. And maybe if you beat yourself up a little bit about it, you'll have even more chocolate than what you really wanted in the first place, and so on. And so we label ourselves, or we think it's a question of discipline and willpower, because we don't look at, how am I actually nourishing myself? And is this really the best I can do in terms of my diet? So by addressing that kind of foundation already, that helps people massively. And then from then on, we can start seeing, like, okay, is this really emotional? And when it is, then it can be, someone's way of dealing with stress. A lot of the times when we are feeling stressed, we'll be more drawn to foods that are crunchy, like chips, crisps, things like that. We just want to chew on things, right? If it's someone who's experiencing sadness and using food as a way to soothe themselves, they're more likely to go towards comfort foods or sweet foods. We all have our little kind of different behaviors, right? We all kind of have our little patterns. And so the second layer is really understanding, like, okay, what's that emotion that leads you to eat more? Sometimes I have people as well, they say, I eat out with people I don't necessarily want to be at dinner with, and I overeat because I'm bored. It's just like, okay. Or someone who's in their job and they hate their job and they're like, I'm just going to go and snack because I'm bored out of my, from my job. And so it's really understanding these emotional triggers. And then we go one layer a little bit deeper, which is understanding primary food. And this is a very typical subject of the school that I was trained by, to understand food not just as the food on our plate, but what feeds our soul. Because when we feel nourished and fulfilled on a deeper level, the food on our plate becomes secondary. And so if I'm someone who hates my job, who's miserable in my relationship, who is always giving away my energy to other people, who's always prioritizing other people, then I am going to be drained, and I'm going to turn to food to make up for what I'm lacking on a deeper level. And so my job is to understand, like, how can I get this person to feel more fulfilled on a primary level, like in their soul, so that food becomes secondary. It's just fuel. Of course, it's fine that we take pleasure in food. It's important that we enjoy our food, but it is just food. And we need to feel fulfilled on a deeper level in order to find the right balance with food. So that's kind of the deeper layer, I'd say. And then the last layer is, I've already touched upon it a little bit, is the energetic balance. So I often see this in women who have children who are giving away a lot of their energy to other people and to give a lot of themselves to others. And what happens is that they feel depleted. And what do? They reach for food, which is very, logical, and there's nothing wrong with it. It makes complete sense. They reach for food in order to give themselves what they've given away to others. And so, how can I have better boundaries, and how can I love myself first and make sure my needs are first at the same time as I care for the people that I love? So those are the different kind of layers and that I work on with my clients.
Wow, it sounds very complex and very deep and has many angles to it that we can work on. It does sound a little bit to me like emotional eating can become a coping mechanism for us to deal with different things that are going on mentally, emotionally, even physically. I know that, interestingly enough, when I suffer from chronic pain, and when I have days where the pain is high, I tend to go for the chocolate bar or the chips or things like that. I don't know why. I know it's not good for me. And I might eat one or two and then put it back and go, okay, this is not the way we should go about this. But I do notice that it becomes a coping mechanism for when there is more pain, more stress. Maybe we're dealing with a lot of different things we're unhappy with. So it could be quite complicated to sort all of this out, which makes sense to me of why people struggle with this very hard, because there are so many different layers to this. So when you work with clients, and you said you kind of start by looking at how nourishing the food is. So if some of the listeners are struggling with emotional eating, and they are wondering where they should start with this, what are some of the sort of the basic few steps that they can start with to maybe become more aware of what's happening and start with maybe a couple little changes in their lives that might make a difference for them? What do you recommend for that?
Yeah. So first of all, yes, emotional eating is 100% a coping mechanism a lot of the times. And as you say, that's why it takes quite a bit of work and looking within to understand where this is coming from. And in order to start, I think one of the things I've noticed is when people want to lose weight and emotionally eat, what they do is they try to eat less. And so they will eat lighter foods, try and have less calories. And what happens is that they're less nourished. And so that makes them eat more likely to emotionally eat, right? So it's a little bit of a catch-22. So I would say the best food is the food that you were designed to find in nature. Food has become so complicated. And if we're very honest with ourselves, we go into supermarket, 95 to 98% of what's in that supermarket was never intended to be food, or wasn't food back when our ancestors were hunting and gathering and so on. These are products that we survived on for millions of years without having them, right? And now somehow they've become essentials, even though they're not necessarily part of the human diet. I'm talking mainly about, processed foods and convenience foods and things like that. And of course, they're delicious. I totally get it. But a lot of these foods are addictive, and they don't give us the same amount of nourishment as if we eat the foods from nature, especially if we eat foods that are, local and seasonal and well grown and so on. I mean, we can go down a whole rabbit hole on how we can improve the quality of our food, but research has shown that the better quality food will give you more nutrients. And contrary to what a lot of us might believe, we don't get nourished by calories, we get nourished by nutrients. And so that's why even people who eat too many calories can still experience hunger. They're not hungry because they need more calories. They're hungry because they need more nutrients. And so what I always recommend is improve the nutrient density of your diet, not by buying, cereals that have been, have had more iron added to them and things like that. No, go back to eating real food. What were your ancestors eating? They were eating fruits, vegetables, whole grains, sometimes a little bit, and they were eating meat, fish, chicken, anything as natural as possible. And really stay away from all the processed crap. And I did this in 2009 because I ran into some health issues. And this was actually for me the moment that my healing journey began from emotional eating. It was that in 2009, I went and saw a doctor. I experienced some issues with bloating. I experienced emotional eating. I was depressed. I was just not feeling well, which was not normal for someone who was 26 years old and who was, very determined to be super fit and healthy and exercising and doing all these things. But I was just not feeling well. And so this doctor said to me, she said, you need to go back to eating real food. And I was like, but I'm eating real food. And she's like, no, you're not. You're eating food that you buy at the supermarket. And while some of the food you buy at the supermarket might be good, you're relying on processed foods. And of course, a lot of the foods I was eating, they were labeled as healthy. So I thought they were super healthy, But when I followed her advice, and it was very hard, the first 3 weeks were very hard. My life changed. I woke up one day 3 weeks later and I was like, wow, I feel so different. And I no longer had this lingering feeling of hunger. And I no longer was walking around thinking, what can I eat? What can I eat? What can I eat? Because I was finally nourished. And I was nourished, but at the same time, I'd lost weight. I was like, how is this possible? But it is, and it was. And that's how I've been able to sustain this lifestyle, is because I feel really nourished and good from what I'm eating. And so I'm no longer interested in the foods that may trigger overeating, such as processed foods and things like that are less nutrient dense and that cause a toxic form of hunger.
It's really interesting that you say that. And it makes me think a little bit of sort of the typical North American diet, for example, which has a lot of processed foods in it generally. And also the fact that those foods are actually a lot cheaper to buy most of the time than healthy foods. So, when you buy something frozen that you just have to pop in the microwave, it's generally a lot cheaper than if you buy some organic meat and organic vegetables and you go home and you make yourself a meal. And that is very difficult for a lot of us to deal with as well when we are budget conscious and we are trying to work this out. And it does work against us a little bit, but we can make those choices to really go for the nutrient dense foods, like you said, and the funny thing that happens, I think, is when you start doing that, things start tasting really differently. When I first, stopped eating processed, and, there are days where I will have a bag of chips just because it's one of those days. But in general, I cook every day, and that's kind of what we live on, just home cooked food. And when I go out to a restaurant, I don't actually like the taste of it. And that's one of the weird things that has happened since changing the diet is also my taste has changed to the more cleaner foods and to the more organic foods. So I think if listeners are thinking of making that change, I think there's also some really positive things that start happening. You will all of a sudden have this new appreciation for an apple or for a steak when it's just so clean and it's very healthy for you to eat. So yeah, I love how you're talking about the nutrient dense foods. And I also think there has been links shown in science now that food links with, a lot of chronic conditions, inflammation in the body, links to mental health challenges. So there are obviously a lot of connections that all will come from the food that we put into our bodies. So all the more reason to start looking at your diet and to start making those changes. And, a lot of people that I speak with, they tell me, well, I don't have the time to cook. I barely have the time to get myself ready, my kids ready, go to work. I don't have the time to cook. But there are avenues that people can fit this into their schedules, I would assume. So how do you work with clients on finding these solutions? And what does that look like for maybe busy people, people who work, who feel like they can't fit this healthier lifestyle into their already full schedule?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is time and money are, of course, can be issues. I'd say that from my own experience, having struggled with, chronic disease and autoimmune and mental health and so on, there's one thing I've always said to myself, and since I've had those issues, is that I will never, ever compromise my health. If I have the power to make my health better, like I will do that, because your health becomes so invaluable when you lose it, right? It's just something that we take for granted, but the day we lose it is the day we think, oh my God, like truly, we don't have anything without our health. And what you're saying is like your taste bud change, you have a newfound appreciation for food and so on. That is 100% true. Research has shown that our microbiome changes, our cravings change. One of the things that my clients sometimes say, like, I can't go with that for the rest of my life without having, like, I don't know, X, Y, and Z, like their treat food. And I'm like, no, I'm not telling you that you need to do that. What I'm telling you is focus on right now. And then what often happens is once we finish working together, they've completely forgotten about that one food that they thought was super important, and they don't even want it anymore because they feel so fantastic, and they're just not even drawn to that kind of food anymore. So understanding that our taste buds do change, our cravings change, everything changes when we start changing the food we put inside our bodies, because let's not kid ourselves, that's what creates the cells in our bodies. And there is an absolute direct correlation between what we eat and our mental health. And I think that's why breaking free from emotional eating really requires to have a hard look at what you put inside your body, because I've worked many times as well with people who were on mental health medication. And as our work progresses together over the month that we work together, suddenly they say, oh, I went and saw my doctor and I'm having my medication. And the next thing you know, a few months later, they come off their medication completely with the help of their doctor. So there is a direct link between our mental health and what we eat. And of course, if you are not feeling good mentally because of what you're eating, then breaking free from emotional eating, like emotional eating is going to be a coping mechanism, even more so, right? So it's really like you have to address both. And in terms of time and money, I mean, for sure, I find it's one of the hardest things for me to accept, is that it's actually cheaper now to eat unhealthy food than it is to eat healthy. And it's very sad because health is no longer accessible to everyone. And in my opinion, healthcare is food. It's the ability to cook and the ability to rest and to breathe clean air and so on. The rest, everything else that we label as healthcare, is actually sick care. And the less people have access to healthcare, like what I label as healthcare, the more people we're going to need to take into sick care. So instead of thinking about how much do we need to spend on the sick people, like how about understanding what people need in order to be healthy? And for that, we need good produce at decent prices. And we also need for people to have time. Time is one of these funny things, is that it really depends on what your priorities are, right? So yes, cooking healthy takes time, but what a lot of my clients tell me is like, it brings them so much joy and fulfillment to eat healthy food that time becomes a moment of joy as well, and for their kids to see that they're preparing the food, and it becomes like more of a communion. And I think that this is the other thing, like all of a sudden cooking and eating food has become an inconvenience to people, and it's just like it was never like that before. And I think before, coming together and cooking a meal and eating a meal was a moment of pleasure and joy and connection and community, and that too is an essential part of our physical and mental well-being. Michael Pollan, who's one of my favorite food authors, he speaks a lot about this, the importance of coming together and creating food and creating recipes and sitting down and enjoying our food. Food isn't just about what we eat, it's how we eat it as well. And that is also important for our health.
Yeah, those are good points. And I do remember when I was younger, Sunday lunches together with the family, and, every evening we have dinner together. And those were really important pieces that drew our family unit together. And you're right. Today, many days, I am in the kitchen and I think, I don't have time for this. I wish there was a quicker way. And then I kind of turn around and I look at myself and I go, what are you saying? Like, you are nourishing your body right now with really important things that you're going to need to get through the day. But it is that initial reaction of, we don't have time for that. And, Yeah, so that's a really important part for people maybe to shift their perspective, start a change of perspective on that, on what food really does for us and why we should make the time to make that a priority. There's many kids today that don't even know where fruits and vegetables come from anymore. They don't know where tomatoes grow, or they don't know where pumpkins grow. And that to me is very, very scary. So that reconnection with nature and with what used to nourish us, I think it's really important as well. So you've given us lots of good ideas and good insights. So if our listeners are inspired by what you've been talking about, how can they work with you? How could they connect with you? And what do you offer as far as programs and services for our listeners?
So I have a couple of different programs. I have one program which is called Fit Body Fresh Mind, which is an online platform. What I haven't mentioned on this podcast is, well, I did at the very beginning, that I'm a Pilates and yoga teacher, and I think has been an absolute integral part of my healing journey. And when I work with clients as well, is how can I do fitness that is kind on my body and my mind and my soul? And it's not about, come on, like pushing yourself to the brink and going through pain and so on. It's like, no, how can I create a strong, lean, flexible body while being kind to myself? And so I've developed a program that has over 120 online classes that have been pre-recorded that people get access to when they become members. And they're all re-centered around a fit body and a fresh mind. We always have a mindfulness piece in these classes as well. And then there are recipes that are based on those principles that I shared, which is eating real food that helps stabilize the blood sugar levels and that truly nourish us. So nutrient density being a key principle there as well. And then I share some meditations and some mindfulness exercises that I've benefited from. So I try to add every once in a while some of these, like there's some breath work there, there's a few meditations, there's some journaling exercises. And then we have a community online with other people who are on the same journey of, I want to be fit, I want to be strong, I want to look good, because everyone wants to look good, let's face it. I want to look good, but I want to stop punishing myself, and I want to stop beating myself up, and I want to stop being unkind to myself. And so that's what Fit Body Fresh Mind is about. And it's a membership platform. There's a 7-day trial, so I'm sure you can probably share those in the show notes, so that if people want to take advantage of that free trial, they're very welcome to. I also have an online private coaching business where I work with people one-on-one. And then I have a program called Break Free from Emotional Eating, which is a group coaching program centered around the principles of understanding, like, what is it that causes you to emotionally eat, and how can we break free from that, literally. And that is one of my favorite programs to teach, because when we dig into the underlying reasons and where people are either giving away their energy, or that were they not feeling fulfilled, and they start focusing their energy on creating more fulfillment in their life and having better boundaries and giving more of what they need towards themselves, incredible things happen. I mean, I've had people who have transformed from being, really unhappy and emotionally eating and so on, to creating the life of their dreams 2 or 3 years later, because they finally were courageous enough to open up Pandora's box and understanding, like, why am I doing this? And then starting to address each and every point. And the next thing you know, they're living in a different country. They started their business. They met the love of their life. They're having a child, like all these things. And you're like, wow, all that because you decided to break free from emotional eating? Like, this is amazing. So yeah, those are the main things that I offer. And I'm obviously on Instagram and on Facebook as well.
Sounds wonderful. And we will be linking to all of Maddy's offerings in the show notes, as she said. So if you are curious and you'd like to connect with Maddy, be sure to check the show notes. And of course, if you end up working with her, or you end up taking one of her classes or her programs, let us know what your experience is like. I would love to hear your feedback. What happened for you? What changed for you? What kind of transformations did you go through? So connect with us on Instagram, check on the website, let us know, get in touch. I would love to hear. And of course, I'm sure Maddy would love to hear from you as well and connect with you. And especially if you're facing emotional eating challenges, she can support and guide you in that way. So This has been another incredible episode, and I really hope that our listeners have taken away as much value as I have from talking about emotional eating. I learned so much in this episode, and thank you so very much for bringing all this wisdom and your insights to today's episode. I truly appreciate you being here today, and thank you so much for your time, Maddy.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Take care of yourself. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Journey podcast, please support us by subscribing, sharing on social media, and leaving us a review. We appreciate you. And you can find more of The Journey on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and our website, thejourney.com. Sending you love and courage, and see you next time.